Hey guys, going back to 32nd scale aircraft this week with Revell's 132nd scale Bristol Beaufighter Mk.1 F. Let's open her on up. One thing I will say out the gate, this kit is quite large and probably one of the largest we've looked at to date. Now, this is an older kit with the molds dating from the 1970s. So one thing you'll notice right away is it does have raised panel lining, which thankfully isn't too bad. It's properly scaled, I guess you could say, in terms of the thickness, but honestly, if you really want to do the best job possible, you're going to need to come in and rescribe these details. But overall, shape-wise is correct for the type. Biggest complaint that I have with out the gate, though, is the cockpit detailing. I'll try to see if this will show up on camera as best as possible. The detailing is very poor and rudimentary. They're basically not giving you a whole lot to work with, and is one area that would definitely be improved with aftermarket accessories. Continuing on, we've got the upper inner wing surfaces here. Again, much the same with the raised detailing. One of our cockpit seats does have a little bit of flashing, as well as our cowling pedals for our engines, which in all honesty are slightly overscale in terms of thickness, but that can be relatively easily fixed by just sanding them down some. So it would take a little bit of time and care, but is more than passable. Next up, we've got our center underwing wing and fuselage section for the forward area with the cannon exhaust area up here. Unfortunately, kit does not come with any kind of barrels or anything like that. Again, another area where you could spurge a little and go with aftermarket detailing to add just that much bit more detail to this kit, because given its size, it really needs it. We also have our two main gear wells. Detailing here is non-existent, unfortunately. So it is another area that could use some work. Continuing on, we've got some engine hatches as well as our main cockpit dash panel. And again, try to get this on camera as best I can. Again, detailing is quite poor. We've got our hatch into the rear area, our rear compartment from the cockpit. Again, much the same detail. Now, as for the props, overall the detailing on them is fairly well for the scale. There's not a whole lot I need to say here. However, if we flip them over, they have some of the worst ejector pin marks I have ever seen. They're going to definitely need to be cleaned up. Fortunately, though, they're only on the propeller blades, so you won't have to worry about potentially damaging any of the detailing, as thankfully that part is a separate piece over here, so that will at least keep from having to do too much. But it is something to be aware of. Next, we got our prop governor hubs here, as well as the rear cockpit side panels, which are completely absent of details and are done with the provided decals, which we'll get to in a minute. Continuing on, we've got a pair of pilot figures, which in terms of detailing aren't too terribly bad. They're serviceable. Problem is that they're done in two halves, a front and a back. So suffice to say, getting those assembled and cleaned up will take a little bit of time if you choose to go that route. We also have the innards for the main gear bays. Again, not a whole lot of detail there. And our front cockpit tub which, as you can see, hopefully on camera, very rudimentary detailing, which is unfortunate. Last up, we also have some engine axis, which is for the two Hercules engines. Now, next we've got our outer wing halves, done 2 sections. One interesting note about this aircraft is it has a asymmetric gun loading with 4 on one side and 2 .30 calibers on the other. This being due to the landing taxi lights on one of the wings. So that is a little bit of interesting note. Again, much the same in terms of detailing for the upper and lower surfaces as we've seen previously. Not a whole lot to say there, though. I will also say one thing. With how they have the landing light, it will be a little bit of a challenge to clean that up to properly display. Next up, we've got our main rudder assembly, which has this odd, almost textured-like appearance. I will admit I'm not 100% sure if the actual one used canvas, which if it did, this does provide a nice sort of textured representation. So obviously someone in the comments, please do correct me if I'm wrong on that, right, wrong, what have you. We also have our air inlets for turbo superchargers, as well as our tail gear wheels, which not a whole lot of detailing there. Again, another area you might want to splurge. Our tail gear itself, which now for plastic representation is more than workable. No real complaints. And obviously the engine fronts. Continuing on, we've got our horizontal stabs and elevators, our prop covers, as well as some additional radar and detailing pitot tubes and what have you. Coming down to the end now, we've got our main engine assembly, which for the most part is not too terribly bad. It's definitely workable. Some of the areas are going to be a challenge to clean up just because of all of the small ridges and how they did the I'm blanking on the name, but yeah, how they did the cylinders, sorry. And obviously getting in and trying to clean up all that fine detail will be a challenge. So this may be an area, if you can find some type of aftermarket, again, no, it'd be worth the splurge. We also have our main gear doors, our main gears, our main wheels, which are, give you a sense of size, is quite large. Our main gear legs themselves, as well as a couple of other odd and end detailing parts. Lastly, we have our clear parts. Not a whole lot to say here. They're nicely done. No seam lines that need cleaning up, especially here on this rear canopy bulge. Continuing on, we have a large set of decals, including our instrument panels, which again, even in the decals, are fairly sparsely detailed, which is unfortunate. Again, markings for 2 different aircraft. We'll get into those later. All right, give me 1 second to get all this back in the box, and we will then take a look at the instruction sheet. All right. So, interestingly enough, they use these odd paint callouts. They don't give you an actual paint key in terms of what paint to use. It's just a generic color. So that is something to be aware of. I would say definitely look at references to find what exact colors you're going to need. Assembly, interestingly enough, starts with the engines going together as well as our props before continuing on into the cockpit. Again, I would say if you're going to spend any money, spend money on the cockpit, as it's probably the weakest link on this kit. Assembly then continues in the rear, as well as building up the tail gear. Now, one big thing to note is you're going to need to attach tail gear before you close up two fuselage halves. I would say if you can figure out some way to modify it so you can leave the tail gear off, as that's one less thing that could potentially break, but that is something to be aware of. Continuing on, we button up the wings next before going into adding on a lot of detail canopies, as well as building up our underwings and landing gear for adding on the engines, and then obviously getting to painting. We're given two different paint schemes, one for a Africa-based aircraft as well as a night fighter version. Now, one thing to note with this particular variant is that since it is the earlier variant, it doesn't have the ability to carry external stores such as rockets, bombs, and torpedoes. Another thing to note on the exhaust system, now this is something that took me a little while to find a good reference photo, is that on the Mark 1 variant, specifically the 1F, not the 1C, at least, is that it does have use the exhaust system that this kit comes with. However, later versions use a different exhaust system so it has a hedgehog-like appearance. So if you want to build a later version, you cannot do that with this kit as it is. You would have to source an aftermarket exhaust. So that is something to be aware of. Overall, the kit has some issues, but it is a decent kit, especially for the money. Picked it up for, at the time, the store I picked up was actually closing down, so I was able to get a discount, but the initial price was $50. Now, for a 32nd scale kit, for $50 is not too terrible. If you can get it for less, even better. But given the amount of work you need to do the cockpit, I would say if you don't plan to do something with the cockpit, maybe get this one a pass until someone else comes out with a better representation. Or if you do plan to go with the cockpit, try to get it as cheap as you can so you can afford those aftermarket accessories. So that was a look at Revell's 132nd Bristol Beaufighter Mk.1F kit that has good bones but does need a little bit of TLC. So until next time.